Hello everyone, welcome to my tutorial on Java. Today's tutorial I'm going to continue my discussion on exception handling. Today's tutorial I'm going to talk about the business exception or the custom exception. So what does it mean? Let's say you would like to enforce some kind of validation rule in your program, and if the validation fails, then you are going to throw this kind of exceptions. These are the custom exceptions. And the difference between the custom exception and the normal exception is that, such as the null pointer exception or the IO exception or the file not found exception, these exceptions are the built-in exceptions. But apart from that, you may need to create your own exceptions. So if you look at the code here, we have created a business exception class and it is extending runtime exception. And from our previous discussion, we know that whenever an exception is extending to the runtime exception, that is an unchecked exception. So we are going to create an unchecked exception here. And the next line is a serial version UID, and we'll be talking about this when we will be discussing about the serialization. But just look at these two constructors. One is the business exception and is just taking a string parameter and it's calling or invoking the super class. And the other one is a business exception again constructor, and it's taking two parameters, the string parameter and the throwable parameter, and we are calling again the super class. So this is a very normal exception class. And remember, the purpose of this one is to that we would like to pass on the error that we are going to face whenever a situation comes in. So there is another one class, that is the business exception tester, and you can see that we are taking an input and we are asking to make an inventory item, and we are reading it, and after that we are saying that okay, if the input is less than 1, that inventory item must be greater than 0. So that will throw an exception, and here you can see that we are throwing a business exception over here. And since this is an unchecked exception, we are not required, or we are not putting any kind of throws clause over here. It's just using the throwing new business exception. And here we are just going to print like if everything is okay. So now let's run it. And I'm going to put, let's say, -1 and then enter, and then you can see that inventory item must be greater than 0. So this error message, okay, we are throwing this error message and it has been caught in the business exception. Now this is just a very simple example. You could put also the throws clause here, because there is, I mean, you can enforce these business exception, or you can enforce this logic so that the user, whenever come across this, the method always going to check. So in order to do that, if you put the throws clause, again the calling method must be using the try catch block to handle it. Okay, so now this is one example of the unchecked exception. Remember that if we are going to make this a checked exception, or if we are going to create some checked exception, we have to just put the word here, okay, public class business exception. So now it becomes a checked exception. Okay, so that's all about today's tutorial, and we learned the creating of the checked and unchecked exception. Remember, the checked exception will always extend to the exception class, and the unchecked exception is going to be extending to the runtime exception. And you have to use a constructor, and you have to pass on the error message in there. If it is a checked exception, you have to use the throws clause like here. Okay, you have to use a throws clause, because I have defined this now as a checked exception. So you have to put throws Now this is gone, but you have to handle it over here. So that's the thing we need to always remember. Okay, so that's all for today. Thank you.